Did you know that Red Bull's latest updates might not be enough to keep Max Verstappen in his title fight? And the most worrying thing is that all this is happening while McLaren is running away with the championship? Give me your opinion. Can Max continue fighting with his car, or does he need a technical miracle? Are we seeing the beginning of Red Bull's decline in 2025? Today we take an in-depth look at the RB21's new upgrades for the Imola GP, Max Verstappen's competitive landscape, and what's really going on inside Red Bull. To understand the true magnitude of the challenge facing Max Verstappen this season, it's essential to look at the current landscape from a broader perspective. In just 6 races, the dynamics of the championship have completely changed. McLaren has not only emerged as a strong contender, but has also become the new technical benchmark in Formula One. With 5 wins under its belt and overwhelming consistency in both qualifying and race pace, the British team has managed to position itself at the top of both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, leaving Red Bull in a state of technical vulnerability not seen for several seasons. Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris have found in the MCL 38 a weapon capable of dominating a wide variety of circuits, from fast tracks to the most technical and aerodynamically demanding. Meanwhile, Red Bull is experiencing an unusual situation. After years of dominance and almost unchallenged superiority, the RB21 has become a car with inconsistent performance and is increasingly difficult to optimize. Although it demonstrated respectable competitiveness on circuits like Suzuka, on tracks like Miami the deficit has been alarming, more than 40 seconds behind the race leader. The most worrying aspect is not just this time difference, but also the way the car behaves in different conditions. The RB21 has revealed a completely bipolar character, showing efficiency in high-speed, low-load scenarios, but clearly suffering in slow or technical cornering sectors where tire management, mechanical grip, and aerodynamic efficiency are crucial. This inconsistency not only compromises performance, but also limits the team's ability to generate a clear and effective development strategy. Added to this context is another key factor: the constant pressure of having a driver like Max Verstappen, who despite everything continues to achieve results above the car's actual level. Verstappen has managed to extract the most from the current technical package, even scoring pole positions in very unfavorable conditions, as happened in Miami, where his qualifying performance was the product of a near-perfect lap in traffic and taking advantage of other people's mistakes. But such brilliance has a limit. The Dutchman has been transparent in his statements. Talent isn't enough if the car doesn't respond consistently. His phrase, shouting and complaining won't solve the problems, shows a mature attitude, but also reflects the internal tension within a team that is no longer the fastest and is forced to redefine its technical priorities on the fly. Red Bull can no longer rely solely on the brilliance of its star driver. The car's performance urgently needs to improve if the team wants to stay in the championship fight. The current statistics are overwhelming. Max Verstappen has contributed 78% of the team's points, a number that, while highlighting his superiority, also highlights the overdependence Red Bull has developed on him. With rivals like Mercedes and Ferrari making up ground, and with McLaren in top form, the margin for error is reduced to 0. And the worst part is that the pressure isn't just coming from outside. Within the team itself, a sense of urgency, even anxiety, is beginning to be felt. Technical decisions must be made quickly, but also intelligently, in an environment where every tenth of a second counts and where rivals aren't waiting. The initial context, therefore, couldn't be more complex. Red Bull is no longer the team to beat and is now forced to respond, not from the comfort of leadership, but from the need to survive in a season that is leaning dangerously toward McLaren. And at the center of that storm is Verstappen, seeking to keep his chances alive while his team struggles to find solutions that have yet to arrive. Now that we understand the magnitude of the problem, it's time to take a closer look at the rumors shaking the paddock. What is Red Bull secretly preparing to try to reverse the situation? And how true are the leaks about an upgrade package that could change everything or nothing at all? In the world of Formula One, rumors are rarely just unfounded hearsay. Behind every leak, every softened public statement, or every ambiguous denial, there's usually a partial truth intended to protect strategic interests, maintain team morale, or control the expectations of fans and the press. And what has begun to circulate strongly around Red Bull in recent weeks is precisely that: a wave of rumors that points to a deeper movement than the team is willing to publicly admit. For days now, the perception has been growing that the RB21 updates for the Imola Grand Prix are not simply a series of minor aerodynamic tweaks, as Christian Horner insists in every interview, but rather part of a silent but critical review of the car's overall concept, a kind of first step toward a technical reconstruction that could determine whether Verstappen can remain a real title contender. These rumors, far from dissipating, have intensified following the leaked images during the shakedowns prior to the race weekend. They clearly show a substantial redesign of the car's floor, with notable changes in the venturi duct area, as well as a much more aggressive profile at the edges of the floor, suggesting a structural modification that goes beyond aesthetics. Furthermore, the side pods have received special attention. The addition of a new directional fin under the radiator air intake is not simply an aerodynamic curiosity, but a key element in redirecting airflow toward the floor and diffuser area, with the aim of improving both cooling and the car's efficiency in medium and low-speed sections. These seemingly technical decisions have profound significance. Red Bull is admitting, through actions more than words, that the original design of the RB21 has structural flaws that require immediate intervention. Added to this is an increasingly tense internal dynamic. According to sources close to the team, there is a notable gap between what is said publicly and what is discussed behind closed doors. While Horner continues to repeat that there's no major update here, it's all incremental gains, Helmut Marko and other key engineers have privately acknowledged that the car needs significant changes to remain competitive at every circuit on the calendar. This double standard has raised suspicions among analysts and journalists in the paddock. Is Red Bull playing dumb to avoid external pressure? Or is this a deliberate attempt to keep a low profile while they prepare for a more aggressive second half of the season in terms of development? But the rumors don't end at the technical level. There is also talk of possible tensions between Verstappen himself and team management. Although publicly Max maintains a supportive stance, his tone has changed. In several interviews, he has hinted that there's not much more we can change in qualifying, or that we need big steps, not small adjustments. These statements, while diplomatic, also suggest that the driver is beginning to lose patience. And with good reason. Max knows better than anyone that this is a championship that can slip away in a matter of 2 or 3 weekends if the car doesn't make the necessary leap. Furthermore, the fact that McLaren is developing its car with superior technical aggression puts even more pressure on Red Bull, which is now not only competing against the clock, but also against the pace of development of its direct rivals. The paddock environment has also begun to speculate about more extreme scenarios. Some specialized media outlets, such as Automotor UND Sport in the race, have suggested that if Red Bull fails to improve its performance before the summer break, there could be more radical internal changes, both in technical management and development strategy. Doubts have even been raised about the continuity of the current car concept, with some suggesting that the team may be considering accelerating the introduction of a B version of the RB21 for the final part of the championship. Although these hypotheses have not yet been confirmed, the fact that they exist and that they come from sources with access to internal information reinforces the feeling that the environment at Red Bull is far from stable or controlled. Given this scenario, it's clear that the rumors aren't mere distractions. They are, in fact, a reflection of a team going through a period of technical and emotional uncertainty and which must make strategic decisions in the midst of an increasingly complicated battle. With all eyes on Imola, what happens in this race could serve to validate or discredit much of the speculation. And for Max Verstappen, what's at stake goes beyond a one-off victory. It's about keeping his aspirations of a 4th championship alive in a year where every detail counts. And now that the rumors have come to light and the veil of public statements is beginning to crack, it's time to analyze how Red Bull and Verstappen are reacting to this new scenario. Because if the problems are already on the table, the big question is, what are they doing to solve them? Amid this sea of uncertainty and contradictory signals, Red Bull's official position on its current situation appears to be built on a delicate balance between media diplomacy and internal pressure for immediate results. From the team's management team, Christian Horner has adopted a repetitive and calculated rhetoric. Whenever he is asked about the RB21 updates or the deficit against McLaren, he responds with a mixture of forced calm and strategic denial. Phrases like, "It's all about incremental gains," or "There's no need to dramatize," have served as his public shield against the growing wave of technical questions. However, this restrained language stands in stark contrast to Max Verstappen's own statements, the analyses of independent experts, and the technical images showing notable changes to the car's architecture. This double standard is no coincidence. It is part of a containment strategy to prevent external pressure from further affecting a team that, for the first time in a long time, no longer has absolute control of the narrative or the championship. Behind the cameras, the story is different. Helmut Marko, known for his direct style and for not mincing his words, has been much clearer about Red Bull's current situation. The veteran team advisor has admitted that Mercedes has closed the gap and that Ferrari has also become a threat in certain race conditions. But the most forceful warning came when he acknowledged that the new parts will bring us closer to McLaren, a statement that, far from instilling confidence, functions as a tacit admission that the team has been below the necessary level during the first 6 rounds of the calendar. And when someone like Marko, who rarely allows himself to show signs of vulnerability, adopts that tone, it's because the internal situation demands urgent measures. In fact, he himself has said, "Max compensates a lot with his talent, but in the race we see McLaren's incredible speed," making it clear that having the most consistent driver on the grid is no longer enough if the car doesn't fully support him. For his part, Max Verstappen is playing an increasingly complex role within the team dynamic. Beyond his unquestionable driving ability, what has become clear this year is that the Dutchman has also become a kind of emotional and technical buffer within Red Bull. His ability to remain competitive even when the car is not in ideal condition has been the decisive factor in keeping the team in the championship fight. But that ability has its limits. In several recent interviews, Max has revealed a mix of realism and contained frustration. Comments like, "If I had to do another qualifying session, I don't know what else we could change," or "We need big steps," are not just random phrases, but clear signs that the driver is feeling the weight of having to compensate, time and again, for the RB21's technical deficiencies. And while he does so without resorting to dramatics, his words serve as a direct warning to the coaching staff. Time for minor adjustments is running out. There is another important aspect that reveals Verstappen's true stance, his long-term strategic vision. While he remains steadfast in his commitment to the team, he has also begun to use language that suggests he won't settle for fighting for isolated podium finishes. When he says that the championship is very open, we can't rule out anyone in the top 6, he's not only reinforcing a constantly alert mindset, but also indirectly putting pressure on his own team to accelerate the car's development. Max understands that a half-second per lap difference isn't simply a disadvantage, but a chasm in terms of competitiveness in today's Formula One. And while he has the ability to minimize those margins in certain circumstances, he knows he can't do so for an entire season without it taking its toll on him physically, mentally, and emotionally. Red Bull's internal dynamics, therefore, are strained on multiple fronts. They have a driver who continues to perform above the car's level, a technical management team that has yet to find a definitive solution, and media pressure that grows with each passing race without a win. In this context, the team's official position, however optimistic it may appear, is no longer enough to allay the doubts spreading both inside and outside the paddock. While the changes made for Imola are an attempt to make a technical turnaround, the underlying problem is deeper. It is a silent crisis of competitive identity in a team that is not used to being chased, but rather setting the pace. And this change in role is testing not only Red Bull's technical capacity, but also the cohesion and strength of its internal structure. Now that we have unraveled how both the team and its star driver are positioning themselves in the face of this technical crisis, it is necessary to go a step further. Because even if internal tensions are channeled properly, the truly decisive factor will be what happens if Max Verstappen decides to take the next step in his career. What would happen if he ultimately opted to change teams? And what consequences would such an exit have, not only for Red Bull, but for the entire Formula One? When a team of Red Bull's caliber enters a spiral of technical doubts, media pressure, and over-reliance on a single driver, the repercussions are not limited solely to the points table. The potential consequences of not reversing this trend can be profound and far-reaching, affecting not only immediate performance but also structural stability, team morale, contractual relationships, and even the balance of power across the entire grid. At this point, the stakes for Red Bull go far beyond winning or losing a race. It's about preserving a competitive project, avoiding a talent drain, and above all, maintaining the confidence of a driver who has already proven that, with the right car, he can dominate an entire era of Formula One. The first and most obvious consequence of failing to achieve consistent performance with the RB21 is that Max Verstappen could no longer be a real championship contender. In a scenario where technical development doesn't evolve as quickly as circumstances demand, it's very likely that Red Bull will not only lose ground to McLaren, but will also see Mercedes and Ferrari enter the direct fight for podiums and victories. This situation would create an increasingly adverse environment, where isolated results would no longer be enough to sustain a solid campaign. And that's a scenario Verstappen would be unlikely to accept. Not out of a lack of loyalty, but rather out of a competitive instinct that has defined him since his early days in the category. Max knows that his window of opportunity to continue winning championships isn't infinite, and he also knows that there are teams with resources, fresh ideas, and very attractive technical projects that could tempt him if he feels Red Bull has lost its ability to react. But the potential impact goes far beyond a hypothetical departure of the Dutch driver. If Verstappen were to decide to explore other options in the coming years, Red Bull would face a technical and psychological void of enormous proportions. It's not just about replacing a fast driver, it's about losing a figure who has been the team's absolute pillar during its most successful phase in the late hybrid era. With Max out of the equation, Red Bull would not only lose a source of points, but also its main strategic asset, its greatest internal reference, and the name on which they have built their narrative of success over the last decade. That loss would have direct implications for the car's development, its relationship with sponsors, the motivation of the technical staff, and, most importantly, the public perception of the team as a title contender. Furthermore, in a context as technically fierce as the current one, every misstep can be costly. If the improvements applied to the RB21 don't meet expectations in the upcoming races, Red Bull risks being trapped in a kind of technical limbo, too far ahead to challenge McLaren, but not strong enough to keep Mercedes and Ferrari at bay. In that scenario, the team would not only lose relative performance, but also tactical flexibility and influence over the season's development. And that, in such a tight championship, is tantamount to surrendering control of your competitive destiny. Furthermore, any attempt at recovery in the second half of the year would entail taking even greater risks in terms of design and strategy, which could lead to errors that structurally compromise the project. Another side effect that cannot be ignored is the emotional and psychological impact on the rest of the team. When a team is accustomed to winning and suddenly finds itself in a secondary or defensive position, internal fractures often emerge. Technical decisions begin to be questioned more strongly, the work environment becomes more tense, and the pressure to achieve immediate results can lead to forced errors. This type of wear and tear has already been seen at other historic teams, and Red Bull is not immune to falling into that spiral if it doesn't achieve tangible results in the short term. Even key figures on the team could reconsider their continued participation if they feel the project has lost direction, and that would represent a further blow to the team's overall stability. Finally, there is a silent but equally dangerous consequence: the loss of Red Bull's authority as a benchmark in Formula One. For years, the team has been the technical standard everyone sought to achieve. If it suffers a season below expectations without showing the ability to respond quickly, that image begins to erode. And with it, its ability to attract young talent, forge strategic alliances, or influence future regulatory decisions also weakens. All of this, combined, makes this moment a turning point, not only for the current championship, but also for Red Bull's place in F1 for the coming years. Now that we've explored the consequences of his potential stagnation, the focus shifts to a key aspect that will determine whether Red Bull manages to get out of this rut or not: the immediate future. Because beyond the promises, calculated statements, and technical analyses, what really matters is what happens in the coming weeks. What scenarios are on the horizon if the updates work? And what will happen if they don't? That is the big question we are going to address now. Looking ahead, the immediate future of Red Bull and Max Verstappen is at a point of maximum tension and uncertainty. The Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola will not just be another race on the calendar, but an event that could act as a definitive barometer to measure the true effectiveness of the RB21's new technical package and, above all, the direction the team will take for the remainder of the season. In these types of contexts, where performance gaps are so narrow and expectations so high, any detail can tip the balance. And this is where the most likely scenarios for the coming weeks begin to take shape. Because despite the team's secrecy, there are concrete elements that allow us to project with a certain degree of logic what could happen if the technical improvements perform as expected, and also what kind of crisis would be unleashed if they fail. In the most optimistic scenario, if the updates implemented at Imola manage to close part of the gap separating Red Bull and McLaren, the team could gain valuable time and internal confidence. It's estimated that a reduction of at least 0.3 per lap in race pace would be enough to put Max Verstappen back in a position to fight for victory at certain circuits, especially those where individual talent can make the difference. This type of improvement, while not radical, would represent a significant morale boost and serve as a foundation upon which to build an even more competitive package for Barcelona and Silverstone, where a more aggressive second phase of updates is expected, adapted to the new wing regulations that are coming into effect. In this scenario, Red Bull would keep its title contenders intact, and although it would still depend in part on Verstappen's stellar performance, it could regain the narrative of a resilient team that responds under pressure. However, the other scenario is much less encouraging. If the updates don't offer a tangible improvement, if the car continues to show the same balance, traction, and degradation issues that have plagued it on technical tracks, Red Bull would enter a sporting crisis that would be difficult to reverse. The lack of immediate results could accelerate the erosion of internal morale, unleash greater questioning of the coaching staff, and force risky decisions that could backfire. In practical terms, this would mean Red Bull would be stuck in a stalemate, unable to compete head-to-head with McLaren, but forced to take ever greater risks to try to get closer, with the constant risk of losing reliability or making strategic errors. Furthermore, external pressure would increase exponentially. The specialized press, sponsors, and the fans themselves would begin to question not only the car's performance, but also the team's very structure and its long-term planning. What adds further drama to this context is that both Horner and Marko have already indirectly acknowledged that the real qualitative leap is scheduled for Barcelona. This means that Imola is merely an intermediate step, a kind of dress rehearsal that will serve to validate certain concepts before introducing the most ambitious package. But this approach entails an obvious risk. If the weekend at Imola goes poorly, if the new parts don't work as expected, all the pressure will shift to Barcelona, and with it, expectations will rise to a dangerously high level. At that point, improving a few tenths of a second will no longer be enough. Red Bull would be forced to introduce a radically improved car in a short period of time, something that isn't easy in an environment where each team works with limited resources and under strict budgetary regulations. On the other hand, the evolution of rivals must also be taken into account. McLaren isn't going to stop its development. On the contrary, they have already shown that they can introduce solid technical packages with a frequency that Red Bull isn't matching at this stage of the championship. And if Mercedes or Ferrari manage to capitalize on Red Bull's problems, the Milton Keynes team could find itself relegated to a secondary role, not only in terms of performance, but also in terms of media attention. This loss of technical and symbolic leadership would perhaps be one of the most difficult consequences to reverse. Because in today's highly competitive and highly exposed Formula One, it's not enough to be good, you have to appear good at all times. And if Red Bull starts to show visible cracks in its structure, other teams and drivers won't hesitate to take advantage of them.